Welcome to our deep dive today. We're tackling a story that, well, it's really captured people's imaginations for centuries.
It has.
The resurrection of Jesus.
Absolutely.
And we're going right to the source for this one.
Oh.
The Gospel of John, chapter 20, verses 1 through 31.
All right.
This passage, it's got vivid details.
Yes.
Profound questions. It's almost like, a detective novel.
Right.
But it also has this kind of philosophical treatise feel to it as well.
I think what's so fascinating about John's gospel, the way he writes, is that he brings together the emotional turmoil that the disciples are experiencing with this mystery of the empty tomb.
Right.
And you almost experience it on those different levels, not just intellectually, but emotionally and even spiritually.
All right, so let's unpack this thing. Picture this as early morning, still dark, the first day of the week. Mary Magdalene, she goes to Jesus' tomb.
Okay.
Expecting to, anoint his body.
Right.
But when she gets there, the stone's been rolled away and the tomb empty.
Wow. Think about that for a second. You go expecting to find a body, and instead there's just this empty space. What would go through your mind? And John tells us that, Mary doesn't even think about resurrection.
Doesn't even cross her mind.
No, her mind goes right to the worst possible thing.
What's that?
Someone stole the body.
Oh, wow.
That's where her mind goes.
It's such a human reaction, though, right?
Well, it is.
You're talking grief, confusion, fear, all rolled into one.
And she goes running to Peter and, the disciple whom Jesus loved.
Right, which is probably John himself.
Probably John, right.
And she's just exclaiming, "They've taken away the Lord out of the sepulcher, and we don't know where they've put him."
There's so much urgency in her words.
Yeah.
She's desperate to understand what can't be understood.
Yeah.
And of course, Peter and John, as soon as they hear this, they take off running to the tomb themselves.
And this is where it gets, really interesting. John, in his account, he talks about how he outran Peter and got to the tomb first.
Okay.
He looks in, sees the linen cloths just lying there.
Yeah.
But doesn't go in.
Oh, interesting.
Then Peter gets there.
Okay.
Walks right into the tomb.
Yeah.
Sees the cloths, but then also the head napkin.
Right.
It's folded neatly.
Oh, wow.
Set aside.
That little detail about the napkin?
Yeah.
That's not just a random thing. It's a clue. It points to something bigger.
What do you mean?
Grave robbers, they wouldn't take the time to fold a napkin.
No, you're right.
That shows intentionality. It's like a deliberate act.
It's like if you were to find a perfectly made bed
Yes.
in a house that's been ransacked.
Exactly.
You'd be like, hold on a second, what's going on here?
It makes you question everything you thought you knew.
Totally. And then John, seeing all of this, the same scene, he says, he saw and believed. But then there's this line right after that. For as yet, they knew not the scripture, that he must rise again from the dead.
And that's the core of it all, right?
Yeah.
They're beginning to believe, but they don't fully get it.
It's a process.
Yeah, they're still trying to catch up to what they're seeing.
Totally. So the disciples, they leave. But Mary Magdalene, she stays behind, weeping outside the tomb.
Yeah.
And as she looks in, she sees two angels just sitting there.
Oh, wow. Imagine what's going through her mind.
Right.
She's already dealing with the empty tomb.
Yeah.
And now she sees angels.
A lot.
The angels ask her why she's crying. They've taken away my Lord, she says, and I don't know where they've put him. It's heartbreaking. She can't see past her grief.
It's almost like she's missing the miracle.
Exactly.
It's right in front of her.
Right there. And then comes, I think, maybe the most powerful part of the whole chapter. She turns and sees Jesus.
Standing right there.
Standing right there. But she doesn't recognize him.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Think about that. She's looking right at the resurrected Jesus.
Yeah.
But her grief, her expectations, they're blocking her from seeing. But Jesus, he's so compassionate. He asks her the same question the angels did. Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you looking for?
And she thinks he's the gardener, right?
She does.
And she's pleading with him. Sir, if you've taken him away, please tell me where you've put him and I'll take him away. She's desperate to find his body, to bury him properly. I mean, that's love.
That's devotion.
Right.
And then there's this moment of recognition. Jesus simply says, Mary.
And in that one word, everything changes.
Everything. It's like a light going on.
Yeah.
Suddenly she understands.
And she responds, Rabboni?
Teacher? She knows it's him. The joy, the relief must have been incredible.
Overwhelming. But then Jesus tells her not to touch him.
Not yet, because he hasn't ascended to the Father.
Oh, okay.
And then he gives her this mission to go and tell the other disciples, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God.
That's a loaded statement, right?
It really is. So much theology packed into those few words.
We could probably do a whole deep dive just on that one sentence.
We probably could.
But for Mary, in that moment, it's a message of hope.
Absolutely. It's a promise. Death is not the end.
So she goes and tells the disciples.
Yeah.
But they're struggling to believe.
Of course.
That evening, they're all huddled together, terrified, doors locked, afraid of the Jewish authorities.
And then Jesus is suddenly right there in the room with them.
Wow.
That image, I think, it really captures the heart, the faith. Even when we feel totally alone, totally afraid,
Yeah.
the divine can break through. And in the most unexpected ways.
So what happens next?
Jesus says to them, "Peace be with you." And to help them believe, he shows them his wounds.
The wounds from the crucifixion.
Yeah, it's like physical proof, you know?
So tangible.
So real. Their fear turns to joy. Doubt becomes belief.
Powerful.
And that's just the start of their journey. Their belief will be tested again and again.
Yeah, right.
As they figure out what it all means, this resurrection, the mission Jesus gives them. But right now, they've seen the impossible. And their world is forever changed.
We've seen the empty tomb. We've heard about Mary Magdalene's encounter with the resurrected Jesus.
Right.
Now Jesus appearing to the disciples.
Yes.
But John's account doesn't end there.
It doesn't.
No. He introduces us to another character whose experience adds a whole other layer to this whole story of faith and doubt.
Who's that?
That is, of course, Thomas.
Doubting Thomas.
The one and only.
Yeah.
So Thomas, he wasn't with the others when Jesus first appeared to them.
Right.
And when they told him that Jesus was back, well, let's just say his response was less than enthusiastic.
He wasn't buying it.
No, not at all. He was like, unless I see the nail marks in his hands with my own eyes
Yeah.
and put my finger in those marks and my hand into his side, I won't believe it.
He needed proof.
Major proof.
Yeah.
It's almost like he was challenging the other disciples.
Right.
Maybe even Jesus himself.
Like, put up or shut up.
Exactly.
But what's interesting is that John, he doesn't make Thomas out to be the bad guy here.
Right.
You know, he's not like the opposite of all the faithful disciples.
He's not a villain.
No. John presents him as someone who's struggling belief. Like, how do you reconcile what you believe with what your senses are telling you?
I think we can all relate to that.
Oh, absolutely.
How many times have we questioned something that seems too good to be true?
Right.
Something that just doesn't make sense logically.
It happens all the time.
So, a week later, the disciples are gathered again. This time, Thomas is with them.
Okay.
And wouldn't you know it? Jesus appears again.
He does love a good dramatic entrance.
He does. But here's the amazing part. Jesus doesn't get angry with Thomas for doubting.
No.
No. He speaks directly to him.
What does he say?
He says, reach out your finger and see my hands. Put your hand into my side. Stop doubting and believe.
Wow. It's like Jesus knew exactly what Thomas needed.
He had him right where he was at.
Offered him the proof he was looking for.
And how did Thomas react to that?
Well, overcome by what he was seeing, Thomas says, "My Lord and my God." It's a total surrender.
From doubt to belief.
A complete transformation.
It really shows how doubt, when you face it head on,
Yeah.
can actually lead to a stronger faith.
More grounded.
Yeah. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He goes on to say, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. And it's not just for Thomas. It's for all of us.
Who haven't actually seen the risen Jesus.
Right. We're called to believe.
Based on the testimony of those who came before.
Yeah.
On the power of this story and the legacy of faith it's inspired.
It's a big ask, isn't it? Especially in our modern world.
It is.
Where everything needs proof, evidence, scientific verification.
Right. We want to see it to believe it.
But John's suggesting that there's another way of seeing.
What's that?
Seeing with the eyes of faith.
I like that. Seeing beyond our physical senses.
It's not blind faith, though. It's about being open to the possibility of something more.
Something bigger than ourselves.
Something we can't fully understand or explain.
With our limited human perspective.
Exactly. You know, going through this chapter, I'm struck by how carefully John tells this story.
In what way?
He doesn't just give us a play-by-play of what happened.
Right.
He picks specific details. highlights certain encounters.
He's shaping the narrative.
He is. He's guiding us to a deeper understanding of what Jesus' resurrection means.
I see what you mean. It's like that detail about the folded napkin.
Yeah.
Such a small thing.
But so important.
Right. Grave robbers wouldn't have done that. It points to something more.
It's intentional. Orderly.
Yeah.
Like a sign that something amazing has happened.
Exactly. And then there's how John describes his own race to the tomb with Peter.
Yeah, he outruns Peter, gets there first.
Almost like he's emphasizing that he was there.
He saw it, he believed it.
Pay attention, this is important.
He wants us to know he was a witness.
Right. And then there's the way he contrasts the disciples' fear and doubt with those repeated appearances of Jesus.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's like a reminder that even those closest to Jesus struggled with this.
They had a hard time understanding.
They did. It took time, proof, repeated encounters for them to really get it.
Which makes their story all the more relatable, don't you think?
Absolutely. If they, who knew Jesus so well, had doubts,
then it's okay for us to have them too.
Of course. John's not afraid to show us the human side of faith.
The messy parts.
The doubts, the struggles, and it makes the story that much more powerful, more real.
He's not sugarcoating anything.
No. He's giving us an honest look at what it means to believe, to wrestle with something that seems impossible.
And the women in the story, Mary Magdalene especially, she plays such a crucial role.
She does.
She's the first to see the empty tomb, the first to encounter Jesus.
Right.
And she's the one who gets the message to the other disciples.
It's significant.
In a time when women's voices weren't often heard.
They weren't.
John puts her front and center.
She's not a passive observer.
No.
She's an active participant.
A key player in this whole resurrection drama.
What do you think that says to the early Christians?
I don't know. It's a good question.
And to us today, about the role of women in spreading the message of the gospel.
It challenges those traditional interpretations.
It does, the ones that downplay the role of women.
Right. John's telling us that women weren't just there.
Yeah.
They were active. They proclaimed the good news.
That's powerful.
It is. And it reminds us that the resurrection isn't just a historical event.
No.
It's a living, breathing story.
That continues to challenge us, inspire us to rethink our assumptions.
To engage with this text in new and meaningful ways.
Absolutely.
We've covered a lot of ground, the empty tomb, the reactions of the disciples, even Thomas needing that proof.
Yeah, we've seen how they struggled with it all.
But there's this one piece of the puzzle I feel like we haven't really explored fully. It's that statement Jesus makes to Mary Magdalene.
I ascend to my Father and your Father. You mean that one?
To my God and your God. It seems simple at first glance.
Okay.
But man, it opens up a whole can of worms theologically.
You're right. That statement has caused centuries of debate. Theologians, scholars, they've all weighed in. What's interesting is how Jesus makes that distinction.
My Father, your Father.
My God, your God. It suggests something more complex is going on between Jesus and God the Father.
It's not a simple equation. It's not just saying, hey, I'm God. There's nuance there.
Definitely. And how have different Christian groups interpreted this over the years?
That's what I'm curious about.
Well, you have a whole range of interpretations. Some really emphasize the divinity of Jesus.
Okay.
They see this statement as confirmation that he's one with God the Father. They'll point to other places in John where Jesus says similar things.
Like, I and the Father are one.
Exactly. But even within that interpretation, there's nuance. Some see it as total unity, like their essence is the same.
Inseparable.
Yeah. Others see it as unity of purpose, like their will is aligned, their actions are in sync.
So even when agreeing on divinity, there's still debate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what about those who focus more on the difference between Jesus and God?
That's the other side of the coin?
Yeah, they'll often highlight that phrase, my God,
Okay.
as evidence that even after the resurrection, Jesus still sees God the Father as having a higher authority.
Interesting.
So for them, Jesus is the Son of God, but still subordinate to the Father.
In a hierarchy.
Right. They might say that Jesus, as a human, worshipped and depended on God even after rising from the dead.
It's mind-blowing how one sentence can spark such different views.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's meant to make us think, to wrestle with these huge questions about God, about Jesus, about their connection.
I think so. And it's important to realize that these debates, they've shaped the whole history of Christianity.
Really?
Yeah. Think about the Council of Nicaea back in 325.
That was a big one.
It was. They met to address these very issues. These bishops, they were trying to nail down a clear understanding of how Jesus and God relate.
And that's where the Trinity came from.
Exactly. The doctrine of the Trinity was their attempt to hold together both the divinity of Jesus and the idea that there's only one God. Not an easy task.
The Trinity. It's one of those things people call a mystery, beyond human comprehension.
Yeah, it's a tough concept. But basically it says there's one God, but he exists in three persons.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
That's it. So you can see how this one statement in John 20.
It's had a huge ripple effect.
Huge. It shaped how people understand God, understand Jesus, understand their own place in it all. It's not just some abstract idea.
It's real. It's impacted people's lives.
Absolutely. And it's still debated today. What I find powerful is how this passage encourages us to engage, to really delve into theology, to grapple with these questions that have puzzled people for centuries. Faith isn't just blindly accepting things. It's about seeking to understand. It's about dialogue, about working through the hard parts of belief.
It's a journey, from the empty tomb all the way to these deep theological concepts.
And along the way, there's doubt, fear, joy, wonder. We learn about ourselves and about the world.
It's been amazing going through this chapter with you. From the physical details to the theological nitty-gritty, John 20 packs a punch.
It really does. It's a story of love, loss, and ultimately hope. It pushes us to face our doubts, to try to understand the divine, to find meaning in a world that often feels messy and uncertain.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what would you say is the main takeaway for our listeners?
I'd say it's this. Don't just read this passage for the story. Really dive in. Think about the historical context. Feel the emotions of the characters. Wrestle with the theology. Let the questions it raises challenge you. The resurrection isn't just a past event. It's a living story that still speaks to us today. It invites us to grapple with faith, with Dio, with the meaning of life itself.
What a great way to put it. And for our listeners, we'll leave you with this final thought. How does the resurrection story shape your understanding of faith, of God, and of what it all means? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.